Oops. Okay. Hey, everybody, it's Aunt BB here. It's July 3rd, 2018. This is my 4th of July video. This is the second attempt at my 4th of July video because Viacom blocked the first attempt. So we'll see how this goes. I've removed what I think is maybe the objectionable content. They put a worldwide block on it. So I was able to play back the other video on some devices that I have, but not all. So I have a little message for Viacom right now, a special 4th of July message for Viacom. And this is it. Fuck you, Viacom. Okay. So I'm Aunt BB, but my name, people think I'm hiding my identity or something, so that's why I'm starting to be on camera more. I'm not hiding. My name is Barbara Hammer. I'm a transplanted Virginian, living in Canada, and I have dual citizenship. And the 4th of July still means a lot to me. I don't really celebrate Canada Day, July 1st, which we just had the Canada Day long weekend, so it doesn't mean anything to me. So 4th of July is when I sort of reassert my American identity, and I needed to talk to people about American expats. And American expats get a lot of disrespect, and people don't understand. You're still American. You're just living outside of the United States. That's all it is. Today I was in a live stream, a YouTube live stream in the live chat, and sure enough, people say, oh, she lives in Canada. She's not a real American. And that's bullshit. And I told them, listen, I've got strong roots in the U.S., and I still identify as American. I just have dual citizenship now for practical reasons. I still carry a U.S. passport, and I even have a Nexus card that identifies my citizenship as U.S. It doesn't say Canada. And American expats, they just are, people people don't understand citizenship. They don't understand when you live in a country, it doesn't mean you're a citizen of that country. And you can be a citizen of a country and be living outside of that country and be just as patriotic as anybody living in that country. So it's just ridiculous. So there are people in the U.S. there are people who live in the U.S. They're not American citizens. They have a work visa or student visa, or they're permanent resident or green card holder, as it's sometimes called. And there are lots of Americans who live outside of the U.S. And I have talked to other American expats, and they experience the same problem. People just don't understand. And American expats are actually often even more patriotic than Americans living in the U.S. because they understand the difference, and they value things like the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, and they understand how all of that is in peril right now, what's going on in the U.S. And Americans living outside of the U.S. tend to be better informed about these issues. So I'm really sick of that. And people in the United States need to show more respect for Americans living outside of the United States. Because to be an American outside of the United States, especially in Canada, you get a lot of shit thrown at you just for being American. And so you have to be even stronger than any American living in the United States, because you get all kinds of bigoted remarks, especially in Canada. It's just ridiculous. I've been told to go back where I came from, and they associate me with the U.S. government. I am not the U.S. government. I'm an American. That's it. Anyway, that's my rant. So today, I'm just going to talk about the perspective of the American Revolution in Canada a little bit. So I played that theme from 1776. It was a very popular musical in the 1970s, and they composed it. They produced it in anticipation of the bicentennial in 1976, and it was at a time when people were really questioning the U.S. and there was sort of because of Vietnam and Watergate and the corruption of the Nixon administration, people were really questioning what was going on in the United States, and they were trying to go back to the origins of the United States in a fun way. And that's what this musical was all about. There are actually a lot of people in Canada who are descended from Loyalists who left the American colonies during the Revolution and at the end of the American Revolution. And they're called United Empire Loyalists. And there's I will have links for all these things, but there's an organization called the United Empire Loyalists Association of Canada. And I've met some of these loyalists, or people descended from loyalists, and they're very conservative and they're really snobbish. And I knew one, and she would brag about, she would complain about, my ancestors were so oppressed. And she'd also brag about being descended from people from some of her ancestors that come over on the Mayflower, just real snobs. So the loyalists that I've met, they're just a bunch of conservative snobs. So I don't really have any use for them. So the Loyalists during the American Revolution, they agreed that there were problems with the relationship between the colonies and the British monarchy, the British government, but they didn't believe in separating. They didn't believe in declaring independence. And they wanted to stay. They wanted the American colonies to stay in the British Empire. So at the time of the American Revolution, there were around 2 million people, 1 million of whom were in Virginia. Yeah, so Virginia was a major colony, and I'm from Virginia. I'm very proud of Virginia. It's called the Old Dominion. And about a third of the people in the American colonies wanted independence. About a third wanted to stay in the British Empire, and about a third were kind of indifferent about the whole thing. So this overture to 1776 is actually based on a song in the musical. It's called The Lees of Old Virginia. So the character Richard Henry Lee sings this song. And Richard Henry Lee was also known as Light Horse Harry Lee. And so he was known for being a fine horseman, and he was able to deliver messages quickly. And Richard Henry Lee, Light Horse Harry Lee, was actually the father of Robert E. Lee, who was the commander of the Confederate forces, the Army of Northern Virginia during the Civil War. Little bit of trivia there. So as for me, I have many ancestors who fought in the American Revolution, and I know of two of them. There was Lieutenant Isaac Millar. Now, Isaac came from an anglicized Dutch family, and the name was originally Molenaar, which is an old Dutch name. And Isaac's mother came from French Huguenot stock. Her name was Dubois. So that's my background. Is I have some Dutch and French Huguenot in my background. That's on my mother's side. So there was also on my mother's side another veteran of the American Revolution, and that was Henry Kump. Now, Henry Kump came from a German family, so I'm mostly German, of German stock. And Henry, the family name was originally Kumpf, so you just add an F at the end. And Henry, because he came from a German family, and at that time, within German families, you spoke German. So Henry was in charge of guarding Hessian mercenary soldiers who were fighting for the British. So he was guarding captured soldiers, Hessians, and he was assigned to guarding them because he could speak German. And on my father's side, they were Germans. My name is Hammer. That's a very common German name. So the Hammers had settled in what is now on the frontier in what is now West Virginia. And so they arrived, I think, just before the American Revolution. And so because they were new arrivals, they didn't really have a stake in the fight, and they were out on the frontier. So they didn't have anything to do with the revolution, as far as I know. So they were part of that 1/3 that were neutral or didn't fight on either side. So that's my family background. It kind of shows you a little bit of what was going on. You know, my family is an example of lots of people whose families lived back during the American Revolution. Okay, so moving on. I'm going to play you a song by Stan Rogers. He's a fine Canadian folk singer and writer-songwriter, or was. He died in 1983 in a terrible Air Canada. There was fire on an Air Canada flight in 1983 as it was flying from Dallas to either Toronto or Montreal, I don't remember. And it caught fire, and they had to make a forced landing at the Cincinnati airport. So Stan Rogers, he composed a lot of sea shanties, and this is one of them. And this is about a fisherman from, I guess, Nova Scotia, which is the province that's just east, just off the coast of Maine. And so he is singing as a fisherman who was recruited to be a British privateer and raid American ships. And so he was, I think the history is a little bit distorted in this song because it's talking about raiding ships, American ships that are loaded with gold. And I don't think there would have been a lot of ships like that during the American Revolution because money was kind of tight. And a lot of these, the Canadian perspective about the American Revolution and about the U.S. in general is that it's big bad. It's the big bad America against poor little Canada, or the big bad USA against poor little Canada. And it ignores the fact that Canada was and still is part of the British Empire or Commonwealth. So it's not big bad America against poor little Canada. It's the big bad British Empire or Commonwealth against the USA. So I'll play this song for you. So it's a nice song. It's interesting. And it's also, it just so happens that this song is practically an anthem that the Canadian Navy uses. So they play this. A lot of Canadian naval units like this song. So here we go.
Oh, the year was 1778. How I wish I was in Sherbrooke now. A letter of marque came from the king to the scummiest vessel I've ever seen. God damn them all. I was told we'd cruise the seas for American gold. We'd fire no guns, shed no tears. But I'm a broken man on a Halifax pier, the last of Barrett's privateers. How else did Barrett cried the town? How I wish I was in Sherbrooke now. For 20 brave men, all fishermen, who would make for him the Antelope's crew. God damn them all. I was told we'd cruise the seas for American gold. We'd fire no guns, shed no tears. But I'm a broken man on a Halifax pier, the last of Barrett's privateers. The Antelope sloop was a sickening sight. How I wish I was in Sherbrooke now. She'd a list to the port and her sails in rags, and the cook in the scuppers with the staggers and jags. God damn them all. I was told we'd cruise the seas for American gold. We'd fire no guns, shed no tears. But I'm a broken man on a Halifax pier, the last of Barrett's privateers. On the King's birthday we put to sea. How I wish I was in Sherbrooke now. We were 91 days to Montego Bay, pumping like madmen all the way. God damn them all. I was told we'd cruise the seas for American gold. We'd fire no guns, shed no tears. But I'm a broken man on a Halifax pier, the last of Barrett's privateers. On the 96th day we sailed again. How I wish I was in Sherbrooke now. When a bloody great Yankee hove in sight, with our cracked 4-pounders we made to fight. God damn them all. I was told we'd cruise the seas for American gold. We'd fire no guns, shed no tears. But I'm a broken man on a Halifax pier, the last of Barrett's privateers. Now the Yankee lay low down with gold. How I wish I was in Sherbrooke now. She was broad and fat and loose in stays, but to catch her took the Antelope 2 whole days. God damn them all. I was told we'd cruise the seas for American gold. We'd fire no guns, shed no tears. But I'm a broken man on a Halifax pier, the last of Barrett's privateers. Then at length we stood 2 cables away. How I wish I was in Sherbrooke now. Our cracked 4-pounders made an awful din, but with one fat ball the Yanks stove us in. God damn them all. I was told we'd cruise the seas for American gold. We'd fire no guns, shed no tears. But I'm a broken man on a Halifax pier, the last of Barrett's privateers. The Antelope shook and pitched on her side. How I wish I was in Sherbrooke now. Barrett was smashed like a bowl of eggs, and the main truck carried off both me legs. God damn them all. I was told we'd cruise the seas for American gold. We'd fire no guns, shed no tears. But I'm a broken man on a Halifax pier, the last of Barrett's privateers. So here I lay in my 23rd year. How I wish I was in Sherbrooke now. It's been 6 years since we sailed away, and I just made Halifax yesterday. God damn them all. I was told we'd cruise the seas for American gold. We'd fire no guns, shed no tears. But I'm a broken man on a Halifax pier, the last of Barrett's privateers.
Okay, that was Stan Rogers, Barrett's Privateers. Okay, moving on now, along the theme of Big Bad America against poor little Canada. Here's a Heritage Minute that I remember watching and think So this is a video about 1690 in Quebec City. So let's watch this.
Move along, all of you. Make way for the envoy. Make way for
October 8th, an envoy comes ashore with an ultimatum of surrender for Governor Frontenac.
It's been a long time since I've seen the enemy this close. Tell me, Caporal. Lieutenant. Ah oui, Lieutenant. About your Colonel Phipps. General Phipps. Ah, Phipps, oui. Is he still such an idiot? Oh God, monsieur, does he really think he can conquer Quebec with only 2 or 3 ships? Monsieur, we have 34 ships and a full regiment from Boston. Frontenac has 1 hour to surrender. You terrify me, Caporal. Wait! Enough! Arrêtez! Well, Governor Frontenac, your reply, sir. I will reply from the mouth of my cannon.
The Americans pressed the attack, but Frontenac beat them off. Phipps weighed anchor and never returned.
Okay, stop it. Okay, so this is a total distortion of history. Okay, so 1690 Quebec City, that's New France. Okay, got that? It's not Canada. It's not even the British Empire yet. They're talking about the Americans, how they fought off the Americans. They're talking about military British forces coming from the American colonies in Boston. It's not the U.S., it's not America, it's the American colonies, the British American colonies, British forces trying to seize Quebec City. That's part of New France. Total distortion of history. So this is typical. It's always Canada, poor little Canada against big bad America, when it's really the big bad British Empire against the US. Canada is part of the big bad British Empire. Total distortion of history. Isn't that fucked up? I think it is. Anyway, that's typical. These heritage minutes are a mixed bag. Some of them were okay, but this one was like the worst one I'd ever seen. When I first came to Canada, I would watch these on the TV in the 90s, and it was interesting, but I knew this was fucked up. This didn't make any sense at all. Okay, moving on. Oh, I was telling you about the Loyalists that left the American colonies. Well, after the Revolution, at the end of the Revolution, some of them left. But after the Revolution, years after the American Revolution, there were people leaving the United States to go to Canada because they were being offered free land. So these people were called late Loyalists. So really, they weren't rejecting the U.S. They just, I mean, at that time, you just went wherever the grass was greener, and they were being offered free land on what is now Ontario. Or I guess it was still Upper Canada then. So they're late Loyalists. Okay, now another thing, some of the Loyalists were free black slaves who had escaped plantations or whatever in the South or had been enslaved in the U.S. And some of them went to, so some of these they were black Loyalists. So they went mainly to, I guess, Nova Scotia. And actually, there were some Loyalists. I forgot. There were some Loyalists. I mean, I have links to all this, but there's a page I have. Because I had to redo this video, I have to find those links again. They're in the old video show notes. Anyway, so there were Loyalists who left the U.S. and they took their slaves with them to Canada because slavery was still legal in Canada even then. So, but there were some blacks who were freed or escaped slavery, and they went to Nova Scotia mainly. But the funny thing, well, not funny, but the sad thing is that life was so miserable for them in Nova Scotia, and they faced so much discrimination and hardship that a lot of them, if they were, especially if they were from slaves that had been brought over from Africa, they went back to Africa because that was a better choice than staying in Nova Scotia. There was actually a CBC TV show that was made about There was a novel that Lawrence Hill wrote called The Book of Negroes, and it was based on a book that the British had. They made a list of blacks, free blacks, who went to or left the American colonies or the United States, and it was called The Book of Negroes. So this TV show was a fictional account of a slave, a woman who's brought over and is a girl from Africa, from Sierra Leone. And so she's a slave on a plantation in South Carolina. And then she makes her way to New York City. I think she starts serving British troops or some British in New York City during the American Revolution. And then she makes her way to Nova Scotia. She's one of these people in the Book of Negroes, but life is so bad there that she goes back to Africa. And I call this sort of the Canadian version of Roots, except they go back to Africa. They don't stay. So anyway, that's kind of a funny twist in that show, but I never really heard anybody really talking about the problem that life in Nova Scotia was so bad they went back to Africa. Anyway, another thing is there's another TV show that kind of gives you a good feel, The Loyalists. And I've watched this show. It's called Turn Washington Spies, and I think you can still watch it on Netflix. So it's about, the main character comes from a Loyalist family, but he chooses to spy. He pretends to be a Loyalist, but he chooses to spy for George Washington. And so he's from a Loyalist family in New York State, which was a stronghold for the Loyalists. And so it's an interesting story. It kind of gives you a feel for the Loyalists in the American colonies at the time. Okay, so moving right along. Oh, there is one thing I wanted to talk about, and I forgot to mention it in one of my Canada Day videos, but it's appropriate here. So Mark Carney used to be the governor of the Bank of Canada. Right now, Mark Carney is the governor of the Bank of England. He's a Canadian, has only Canadian citizenship. And to me, that shows that Canadian citizenship and being a British subject or a citizen, virtually interchangeable. Yeah, so Mark Carney, like all these banks, international banksters, he came from Goldman Sachs, which is, to me, sort of an imperialistic institution, a neoliberal institution. So, okay, so since I've had to redo this video, I've made it a little shorter and sweeter, but I'll have lots of links in the show notes so that you can check out some of the information that I'm talking about. So I just want to scold everybody. Now, make sure you show respect for those American expats. That's my message today, because it's hard being an American outside of the United States. It really is. You have to be really strong. You have to stand up for the U.S. and you have to stand up for Americans, really, not the U.S. government. People associate Americans with U.S. government in too many countries like Canada. Tends to be the Western countries. I've met people from Iran and Laos and countries where you think they would hate Americans, and they don't. They understand Americans are good people, and they are not the United States government. It's just the way it is. So I'm still fighting the good fight against the British Empire here in Canada, and I'm trying to stay true to my ancestors and their fight against the British during the American Revolution. Okay, so happy 4th of July to everybody. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your patience. And I will talk to you soon. Bye.